Eventide is a great tool for building event-sourced autonomous services. However, while it's easy enough to get it running on your local environment, it can be difficult to see if it's right for you without seeing it in action in production-esque conditions. Heroku allows developers to get projects deployed with very little fuss. Its hobby tier is free, and we can get Eventide going very quickly with a few minor hacks, which will provide ample opportunity for experimentation. Once you see the power of Eventide and service-oriented architecture, you'll be able to evaluate whether it's right for you. Now, a couple of caveats. This tutorial is only about how to get Eventide running on Heroku as quickly as possible in order to see its capabilities firsthand. Your operational topology is unique to your own circumstances. Therefore, it is not recommended you use this tutorial to deploy your services to a production system. Never use code you found on the internet in your own production systems, unless and until you've done your due diligence. Now, Eventide has a working account component example that we can use to demonstrate how to deploy something like this to Heroku. First, let's go ahead and clone the account component. Next, let's go ahead and log into Heroku from the Heroku Client. To do this, I have a shell script that will utilize a Docker container. This Docker container has the Heroku client within it, and the script passes whatever arguments there are to the container. You can also see I'm mounting the current directory to the container, as well as a file called .netrc on my home directory. This is used to communicate securely and automatically with Heroku. Then I use a symbolic link between this script and the file /user/local/bin/Heroku. This way, I can simply type Heroku from the command line. My development repository is filled with these kinds of scripts and symbolic links, mostly when I can't be bothered to use apt-get for the same purpose. Okay, let's go ahead and log in. As you can see, the .netrc file has been updated with Heroku credentials, which Git can then use for the Heroku remote. Next, let's create an app. Because we've created an app on Heroku, the Heroku client has created a Git remote as well for our account component repository, which we can then push our repository to Heroku. But we run into a problem here because the Ruby build pack has a few requirements in order to deploy, one of them being a gemfile.lock file in the repository. As you can see, this account component doesn't look much like a typical Ruby library. For example, where is the gemfile.lock file? What is this settings directory? All very good questions, but not the purpose of this video. All I will say is that the Eventide team views files like gemfile.lock as more of a build and deployment artifact, not something you commit to source control. In any case, the Heroku Ruby build pack requires them if we want to deploy via Git. So, when needs must, and I went ahead and installed gems in order to generate the gemfile.lock. Okay, Heroku compiled the project. Next, we need to get MessageDB running on Heroku. But first, there's a couple of things we need to understand about Heroku's Postgres offering. We can't create Postgres roles on Heroku because they lock that down. Therefore, we can't use the default MessageDB install script without some hacks. We'll need to remove the lines about creating a role and adding privileges to that role. We also need to change the search path for the default role such that the message store schema appears somewhere on it. This way, the Eventide libraries will be able to see the stored functions and tables. Otherwise, they'll only look in the public schema and thus fail. I'll go ahead and show this later. Keep in mind, this tutorial isn't about doing this correctly or safely, but to deploy an Eventide component to Heroku as fast as possible for evaluation. Please, please, please don't do this in your own production systems. Now, we can check our add-ons with this command. And it looks like Heroku already added Postgres at the hobby dev tier to the app. Now, I will have to grab the database URL environment variable from the app, and you can do that with this command. Okay, I have a script written here that will install MessageDB from an environment variable. This script takes a database URL environment variable and separates that into their component parts. This way, I can use the PG environment variables and the MessageDB environment variables with little to no fuss. Let me go ahead and chmod the file. And because we're using the MessageDB gem, we need to install the bin stubs as well. Now, let me go ahead and edit the MessageDB install script. This is what I like about installing gems locally. I can make changes that affect only this project and has no effect on any other projects on my machine. So the lines we need to edit are the ones about creating roles and adding privileges. So right here. And here. Next, I'll export the database URL. And then we run my install DB script. That seems to have worked. So Eventide kind of harkens back to the bad old days of ASP.NET's config files with these JSON settings files. Nowadays, in the Ruby landscape, or rather the Rails landscape, environment variables are used for configuration, which is what Heroku uses. So we need to make a few updates to the account component repository if we want to be able to read environment variables. So we'll go ahead and add a settings file. And this is just a singleton. And then we code our build constructor. So the database URL will be in this format. This is the protocol, the user, password, the host, the port, and the database name. Luckily, Ruby already has a class to parse this for us. And we can grab that from the environment variable. And then we just go down and grab what we need. Next, let's go ahead and build a settings object. And that's it. Next, we need to create a session file that reads from the settings file that we just created. And then we need to pass that into our handlers, writer, and store. All right, let's go and do that. And then let's just go ahead and do some boilerplate. And we'll use the settings singleton that we just created and pass that into the parents build method. Okay, let's go ahead and add these files to the loader file. Next, we need to pass this settings file into the account components start class. And then we can just pass the settings in. Next, we need to update each of these handlers to use the session that we just created. Then we just configure the session here and pass the session in and into here. And the next handler. All right, let's go ahead and try running it. Oops, looks like I have a syntax error. Yeah, let's do that again. Oh, right, I need to export the database URL. Ah, okay. As you can see, Eventide can't find any of the functions because we still need to update the roles schema search path. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to copy the install DB script and use that to log into the database. So we want these PG variables, but we don't need these message DB variables. And I believe this should work. Fingers crossed. Okay, let's go ahead and alter the role. And let's try that again. Okay, so we have the component running, but it's not doing anything because there aren't any commands written to the stream. So let's fix that. Let's go and see what the problem is. Ah, so this doesn't work because the control uses the default session, which tries to grab the settings from the JSON file. We need to modify the control so that it uses the session we just built. Let's try that again. And then let's run the component again. Okay, as you can see, the component seems to be running fine on Heroku's Postgres database. Before we can deploy the component to Heroku, we need to define a process via a Procfile. Heroku uses Procfile to know which processes to run and the commands used to run them. So we just add a process called service, and the script to run that is script start. And then we add that, and then we commit it. Let's go ahead and deploy this to Heroku. So we still need to do one more thing, as our component isn't running quite yet. Heroku first sets the number of dynos running our component to 0, so we need to set the number to 1. And now our component is running. We can view the logs with the Heroku client as well. Okay, looks like we have a problem here. Cannot load such file app gems bundler setup. Let's go ahead and see what that is. Okay, I don't think we really need this. We just really need to require the init file. And then we can get rid of this too. Let's go ahead and deploy again. And let's check the logs. There you go. We've got this deployed. I hope that was helpful, but remember that it was the quick and dirty way to deploy an Eventide component. In the future, I may go into how I might actually deploy one of these things to production. But that's all I've got for today. The code will be available on GitHub for all to see. If you have any questions for me, be sure to check out my website, josephchoe.com. I'm also on Twitter, GitHub, and such like. Thank you, and farewell.